Well, welcome. My name is Cristiano Façanha. I'm a global director with CalSTART. And on behalf of the Transport Decarbonization Alliance, CalSTART and Drive to Zero, and the climate group, EV100, I welcome you all to the second dialogue of four-part series of regional dialogues between fleets and truck manufacturers on how to speed the adoption of zero-emission trucks and vans, today with a focus in North America. But before I introduce our speakers, let's talk about some logistics here. So we will be having a live Q&A session after the presentations, but we will not be using the raise your hand feature. So on the right side of the screen, you're going to have the GoToWebinar dashboard, where you find the questions pane, where you can submit your questions and comments to the speakers. And we want this to be as interactive as possible, so please keep them coming, and we'll try to get to all or most of them by the end. We are also going to be distributing a copy of the slides, a recording of today's webinar, and any other follow-up materials like as well. So moving on, and for those who are not quite yet speaking, if you could mute yourself, like that would be great. And so in terms of introductions, we're going to have, both very important speakers here. So we have Scott Filippi with UPS providing the perspective of a fleet interested in moving into the space in zero-emission freight vehicles. And we'll also have two speakers representing truck manufacturers. So we have John Loma with the Packer Group, Kenworth, and also Aaron Gilmore with BYD Trucks. And I also wanted to introduce two of my colleagues. So Peter Jenkins from CalSTART, and Sida Holtzlock with the Dutch government, and also representing from the Transport Decarbonization Alliance, who are going to be helping us with comments and fielding questions. And so, but we also wanted to get a better understanding of who our audience is. So we are going to have a poll. So, and Laura, if you could launch the poll, that would be great. So what is your affiliation? So are you government? Are you a manufacturer, both in terms of trucks and components and technology? Are you the fleet owner or user? Are you a utility infrastructure provider, or do you belong to another knowledge or service organizations? So we'll give a few minutes here to get all the results. So please do try to respond. And the importance of having a good representation from all of the stakeholders is that all of the stakeholders are needed to work together to bring these vehicles to the marketplace a lot faster, to meet all of our climate and air pollution and economic goals, like as well. So we'll give a few more seconds to get all of you to vote. And so, Laurie, if we can present the results of the poll. So we have a really good split here with 37% representing the manufacturing industry. Really good representation by government as well, with about a third of attendees, with some knowledge and service organizations, and then a combination of utility and fleets. So really great, to see a good representation of all the sectors here. But I just wanted to to get us started, and so Laura, if you can go to the next slide. So one important component here is that the deployment of zero-emission trucks follows a very well-established strategy, where zero-emission technologies, come to the marketplace in waves, taking hold first for transit buses because of predictable routes and the ability to charge overnight at depots. So this is wave number one in this chart, and we call those beachheads, using a military term where you first secure your territory before advancing to much larger territories. And then because of technology transfer, all of the investments in battery technology, in powertrain components, can then be transferred to other applications, such as shuttle vans, urban delivery vans in wave number 2, and then medium-duty regional delivery in wave number 3. And all of that can be accomplished in the short or medium term. And then from there, the same investments can then be leveraged to larger and long-distance applications. So in short, the success that we're talking here comes from the growth of core supply chains transferring similar powertrain and components across different applications. So as technology matures, they expand across applications, get more affordable as each succeeding market builds volume. Next slide, please. Also, we are seeing availability of zero-emission freight vehicles increasing rapidly. And so they are on the verge of a major surge in the United States and Canada. And the number of these vehicles is on track to increase nearly 80% by the end of 2020, compared to 2029. And we expect that figure to more than double by 2023. And if we look into the chart to the right, those is exactly the growth of models by specific segment. And if you look into the purple wedge, we can see that transit bus begins 2019 as the leading vehicle segment in terms of available models, which is consistent with the beachhead strategy. But by 2020, medium-duty trucks, which is the green wedge, they really will boast the most models available on this timeline in North America and Canada, and also the fastest growth. So this trend is largely due to upfit manufacturers with very versatile conversion kits that offer a wide variety of body and chassis combinations. And I also wanted to point to the second blue wedge. Those are heavy-duty trucks that shows the most consistent growth through 2023 in terms of number of models. This is because production timelines are longer, and therefore full market viability will really be stretched over a few years. Next slide, please. Also wanted to point out, a really important policy that was adopted in California, the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule, which is the most ambitious yet feasible regulation that has ever been adopted to advance zero-emission trucks. And then following the adoption in California, 15 US states and the District of Columbia have agreed to work together to accelerate the market for zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles. So the rule recognizes that freight trucks and delivery vans, while representing a small share of the vehicles on the road, they contribute to a disproportionate share of fuel consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, and air pollution. So the rule takes effect in 2024. It's going to require at least 40% of all tractor trailers sold in California to be zero emissions by 2035, and 75% of delivery trucks and vans by 2035. So while other states haven't committed to the same targets adopted in California, they committed to working together to accelerate this market. So we expect some more momentum happening here in the US. In terms of the supportive regulations and policies. So the next slide, please. So it's important to say that that the ACT rule sends very strong signals, but it's not enough to drive market success. So in addition to the sales requirements for zero-emission trucks, we also recommend that leading regions adopt, what we call ecosystems of complementary aligned regulations, incentives, and investments that, have fleet purchase requirements that match the sales requirements, but also really important to give incentives to cover the vehicle upfront costs, because we're really only going to launch this market once we achieve better cost parity, at the same time that we have infrastructure investments and even some local policies such as access restrictions. So, and without further ado, I would like to invite my colleague Scott Felipe with UPS to give a fleet perspective here. So please take on the floor, Scott.
All right, very good. Hi, good afternoon, good morning to some of you. Thanks for having me on the panel, Cristiano. I think I'm a little nervous because there's only 4% of fleets represented, so I guess I'll have to play the heavy from a fleet perspective here. But you know, this is where it is a collaborative effort to get where we want to go. But at the end of the day, this is where the rubber meets the road. You know, so if you say you can make all the regulations you want to, and you know, companies will comply to those, as painful as they may be. But to get true adoption and to make things happen and change happen on a large scale has to make sense, and it has to be something that drives people into that. I mean, why do we have to have a this or that mentality? Why can't the best vehicles for the fleet be the most economically viable too? And you know, with today's technology, you know, this is more than just about switching of energy. This could be a transformation in the way vehicles operate, you know, using full-fledged of technology. We had electric vehicles back in the 1930s in New York City and LA. And so from can we make the wheels turn with a battery and a motor? It's not something we need to prove the concept. And then, you know, over the last 20 years, we've iterated through different electric vehicles, whether they're conversions, whether they're, you know, some small numbers of production vehicles, very expensive. You know, we've learned a lot through that as a fleet, what to do, what not to do, how to deploy. But with that comes a lot of risk. I think if not all, most of those vehicles are stranded. So either they're no longer in the fleet because they couldn't be supported, or they just didn't. They just weren't ready. You know, it was bleeding edge versus leading edge. And, you know, it's a necessary evolution to get where you want to go. I mean, if you compare electric vehicles to the bag phone, for instance, for cell phones, you know, would we have what we had today if we hadn't started out with the, you know, a bag phone? And you know, you move towards that. And so zero emissions fleets, you know, we still have a long ways to go, but they have so much potential to really make a difference, not just environmentally, but from an efficiency standpoint too. So, you know, there's a great opportunity here for us to kill two birds with one stone, or maybe several. So, you know, and that's from a UPS perspective. That's what we want. We want to build that business case to where incentives are really important to get this thing started, but we want to spend those incentives and do it in a way that looks like it will carry off on its own. And that's from our fleet perspective, with the large numbers we have, that's what we're looking for. And you know, it's starting to come together. And I'm sure we'll get into this in further panel discussion, but you know, the infrastructure alignment to the vehicle delivery now becomes this big risk of a huge investment versus when are the vehicles going to show up and what kind of charging do they need. So, you know, lots of things to still work out, but we're getting close to crossing over that plateau.
No, that sounds great, Scott. I think it's really important to hear this perspective in terms of you know, both the technology readiness, right, which I believe we are at a point where technology is ready for specific applications, right, you know, and ready to be deployed. Initially relying on incentives, you know, completely agree with you that eventually the market cannot rely on incentives, and it's important. I really like the point that you made in terms of this technology is really proving themselves, you know, not only for an environmental like component, but really from an efficiency standpoint, right? And they can really leverage even with other technologies to really transform and improve the way that we do logistics today. So thank you very much. And second, I would like to invite our colleague John Loma with Kenwood.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for having us on the panel, Cristiano. And thanks, Scott, for leading in on that. Could you go to the next slide, please? So one of the things we've talked about is what's driving the demand for zero emission vehicles. For us as the OEM, it's really about the regulations. We've got to provide those vehicles. We be able to sell in those markets. And Cristiano's already really hit on those percentages of sales. But we do have some customers that are very interested in this technology now, primarily around the marketing, the branding, the sustainability goals that they have. But most of the time when we talk to those customers, it's still a value equation. They still want a total cost of ownership for those vehicles to be on parity with the diesel truck. So for us, working on getting that purchase price down to where we can try and get to that TCO, or that total cost of ownership, and really take advantage of the low energy costs that you'd see in electric vehicles. But you've all stated it, and I think you stated it as well, Cristiano. Incentives initially are going to be required. And it's not just the grants or the vouchers. I think there's the infrastructure piece that has to be tied into that, potentially even tax changes or FET changes to help with those vehicle costs. And the next slide, I just want to highlight just kind of the volume and scale of what we've been talking about. You showed the percentages, and what I've done here is this is a guess of what we think the market size is. Early adoption of trucks, and I think your numbers are probably pretty similar to mine as far as out to 23, it's low volume adoption. So the green is really, the market adoption and or where we start to see a TCO for those vehicles. And then the blue is where we see the regulation driving it. And this is just assuming a actual market size, and I just flatlined it out through 2030, just to show the size of the market and how many of these trucks we think will be market driven or where we think there might be an actual TCO. So that is, I think, going to be the challenge for us, is how do we get to that adoption rate in those blue boxes where there isn't necessarily a total cost of ownership equation for Scott in the fleets to be able to make those trucks viable. So incentives are going to be incredibly important to help make up that gap. And I think that is kind of the big challenge I see in the future. Definitely, though, we do see trucks that will have a total cost of ownership equation that makes sense. Typically, the smaller trucks and or larger trucks, but short haul, right? So it's really a range equation. So I just wanted to start out with that conversation to give a flavor for where we see it going. But for us right now, it's really about, we got to meet these regulatory requirements. But total volume-wise, it's going to be a lot of trucks. That'll be zero emission by 2030. So we've got to do a lot of work on our side to get to that value equation and try and help minimize that blue box on our side. So that was just the highlight comments. I'm looking forward to the conversation after this.
No, that sounds great. That sounds great, John. And it's like really, I completely agree with you on. On the importance of regulations, to drive the market, but eventually, the cost parity needs to stand on its own, right? For the market really to unleash. So completely in agreement with you there. So third, I would like to invite my colleague Eric Gilmore with BYD, just to provide a second perspective, from a truck manufacturer that has actually, produced a lot of great zero emission commercial vehicles out there. So, please take on the floor, Aaron.
Thank you, Cristiano, and thanks to CalSTART for putting this on today. Next slide, please. Again, I'm Aaron Gilmore, BYD Vice President of the Electric Truck Division in North America. And just to give you kind of a quick perspective of what BYD does, our entire ecosystem of products is really around green tech. So all the vehicles that we produce are battery electric vehicles. and that's anywhere from forklifts to buses to the truck division, which I'm a part of, to passenger vehicles. And the genesis of that kind of came from the company beginning in 1995 in batteries. Used to be cell phone batteries back in the day, and just throughout that last 25 years, we've continued to expand manufacturing operations and in batteries and energy storage systems. We're also in the consumer electronics area, and we have SkyRail, Sky Shuttle products as well, all zero emission type products. So why look at EV trucks, and why now? Why is it important? I think from our perspective, we're trying to create an entire ecosystem of emission-free, clean energy that goes into transportation as well. And so that's why, starting with batteries, we also, within that battery and energy storage division, we also produce solar modules. So from renewable energy to battery storage, to taking those batteries and using them in electric vehicles, to being able to repurpose those batteries when their life is through in a vehicle as stationary storage, and then to be able to recycle those batteries into new batteries going forward is sort of the vision that we have in terms of transportation. You can go to the next slide. We also see this is a great opportunity, of course, to provide a number of green jobs in essentially new markets across the country, and we've already begun that. We have a manufacturing plant in California, over 1,000 employees now across the country, and 750 union manufacturing jobs in Lancaster, California. Next slide. Going back to this kind of question of why now, and sort of what I'm glad Scott brought up the UPS experience, and they've been experimenting with battery electric vehicles for decades and decades. As he pointed out, it's not that fleets don't want to do this. They've wanted to do it for a long time. It's about, where is the technology, when is it going to make economic sense, and how does this all come together? And I think the real answer to that is a lot of things have changed in recent years to drive down the cost of batteries, to drive up the volume and scale of batteries, and BYD certainly been in the middle of all that as well. We're going to be number 1 or 2 in the world in terms of battery production this year, something like 60 gigawatt hours of batteries that'll be put out, and we've been refining what is a technology that is becoming more and more widely used in terms of iron phosphate batteries, using iron as one of those primary metals. It's much cheaper, easier to source, doesn't have the same sorts of implications that some other batteries using cobalt or other rare earth materials have had in terms of complexities. And we found one of the great things about it in an application for trucks is the benefit to safety. It's not like driving down the road with a 40-ton vehicle that has dozens of gallons of gas, flammable liquid on it, and isn't the safest thing in one regard, and batteries are a step in the right direction. But then to have a battery that actually can't be forced to explode or forced to go through like a thermal runaway event is a real positive thing in terms of bringing safety to this market as well. Next slide, please. And that's sort of illustrated by some of the testing that we do on these particular batteries. Next slide. We've delivered 13,000 electric trucks globally in the medium to heavy duty market, and that's a good start. It certainly ranks among the most that are out there, but obviously, as you saw in John's slide, it's just a drop compared to what the market is and where this is all going. And kind of getting back to why why now and what's the synergy here? There's a number of things driving it, and I think my colleagues have sort of pointed it out. There are some customers out there that really want to. UPS is one of them. They want to drive for change for their own sustainability purposes. The vehicles themselves are more comfortable for drivers, no fumes, less vibrations, just an easier workload for a long day in terms of driver health, and then obviously the health that the local communities have as a result of emission-free vehicles. Cristiano brought it up, and John alluded to it as well, things like California's Advanced Clean Truck Rule and what's anticipated in terms of the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule that CARB is talking about to follow, and the fact that 15 states, including Washington, D.C., have signed an MOU to try and proceed in that direction too is certainly a strong indicator, and something that I think is going to not only drive the market from a hey, it's a regulation, you've got to do it, but it starts to make the real hands of capitalism work as well. Maybe even prior to those rules going into effect, fleets are going to have to think about, well, if there's an incentive available today, I should maybe go after that, because if I wait until 2024 when that comes into place, the first 5% or whatever the minimum is of the vehicles that I buy, I'm not going to be able to receive an incentive for, because you can't receive a state incentive from the state of California on something that is required by regulation. So it really makes businesses have to think, but that visibility and that planning is what's going to allow that to happen. So it is a major step in the market. Next slide. I'll just flip through this really quick. The areas that we've kind of focused on, my colleagues have sort of alluded to too. There are certain industries and applications that make more sense today than the entire trucking industry. And those are some of the industries that we've focused on. From terminal operations, where you can always be close to an electric charger, a lot of stop and go, a lot of heavy weight being moved around. Great application for electric. Refuse, same thing, stop and go, short distances, lots of energy being used, really low gas mileage for a diesel truck. Perfect application for electric vehicles. And then in distribution and logistics, again, it's not long range at this point, because if you put too many batteries on a truck, it's too heavy, it's not economic. You really are looking at the regional hauls at this point. Next slide. And I won't take too long going through this. I'll just kind of throw a few pictures up of the trucks that we have in service today, just to show you that they are real, they are going to work. This is our yard truck that can be used and again is good in and around distribution centers, hauling containers at ports, rail yards. Next slide. A day cab, Class 8 day cab. Again, regional routes, drayage, distribution of beverages, is another good example. Next slide. We have a Class 6 box truck that's, again, good for freight movement in and around cities. We have, are able to put a fully refrigerated box on there, so everything's running with electric again, no diesel involved. Next slide. And then the Class 8 refuse truck that I mentioned as well. Again, we've done just about every configuration from side loader to rear loader to roll off. And this is really a great application for electric trucks as well. Next slide. And just in kind of closing, I'm going to go to the next slide. The reality is it is about us manufacturers getting to scale. And we have other vehicles in internationally and other locations that maybe regulation or local authorities have pushed it faster. We have dump trucks that are heavy duty and that are fully electric, cement mixers. I mean, the sky's the limit, because the technology is, as my colleagues have mentioned, it's there. It's capable of doing the work. The question is, how are the economics going to pay off for fleets? And that's a combination of regulation, incentives, et cetera. And there's a lot of things we can do to really make this, more efficient. Anyway, thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Cristiano, and we can looking forward to question and answers.
Oh, that sounds great. Thank you, Aaron. And like really impressive to see, the good number of models already out there for, as you said, for specific applications, right? The technology is real. And but just like interesting, to bring like all the perspectives together that, zero emission technology like needs to be able to lead to better products, not just for environmental reasons. I think Scott did a great job like highlighting that, but more importantly, to make logistics more effective, right? Both from an operational and economic standpoint. Like really good to see that regulations are sending very strong signals to the market, but that incentives will continue to be important, like until the market can stand on its own. And it's only after cost parity is in place that the market will really be unleashed. And so I guess my first question to the panel, like narrowing down on this issue of cost parity, right? So and it's all about building scale in the market. So how are we going to get there? And how are we going to get there a lot faster, right? So any perspectives there?
I can go ahead and start on that. I think one of the challenges today, there are some good incentive programs there that are out there. VW across the country. California obviously has HVIP and other programs that have been working, and they do work. One of the challenges to get to scale is really to allow fleets like UPS that have a significant fleet and are forward thinkers, first movers, wanting to kind of showcase these things, an opportunity to access incentives. Most incentives they're capped. It's thought, well, giving a big corporation that opportunity is not necessarily politically what somebody wants to do. But when you think about it, they're the ones that are the first movers, and they're the ones that can actually drive the market. They may not need that level of incentive because they can place a very large order. They can also be very visible. So I'm interested in Scott's perspective on this, but it feels a lot like the rules are meant to sort of constrain on the use of the incentives, but the real drivers in that market could be a lot of the large corporates that are ready to make the move for sustainability reasons, that have the cash on the balance sheet, but they still can't make the move if the gap is this much, right? It's got to be closer to that parity. So that's one of the things that I think a number of efficiencies can be put into place to make that happen, and have opportunities for some of those big fleets that really want to showcase and show the example to others of how it can be done.
I'll chime in on that. I think those are good comments, Aaron. There's funding and there's incentives, but those are just to cover some of the headaches that come along with the deployments. We have never, to my knowledge, there isn't a large scale deployment anywhere with an electric or a zero emission vehicle, other than smaller sort of things that show will it work, but for that to be an example of what good looks like and what the future could look like, it's going to have to be a specifically designed project with significant funding, because again, there's a lot of work to this and there's a lot of headaches. And for UPS, we're not in the business of making electric trucks. We're in business of delivering packages, and now more than ever, it's more important with the pandemic and the e-commerce rise. So I get caught up in that with what I do, and I realize, oh geez, these trucks, we put 10 on the road, and geez, they're breaking down so often, and next thing you know, the operations team set the tone, but you need to build upon some positives. And, you know, UPS is a place to do that, and it's not, you know, the big fleets aren't necessarily, and the big companies aren't the evil villains. They could be the big brother on the playground that, you know, helps push this along and not really hold things up. So, you know, this is just an effort to get the ball rolling. And yeah, we are willing to do that from a demonstration standpoint, but from a capital expenditure investment, that's a tough one, especially when we don't really have products that you can say have proven themselves in large scale, you know, production numbers quite yet. So yeah, there's a ways to go, but we are definitely excited and interested to do something to really kind of cross over this test and pilot sort of phase.
I'll speak up a little bit as well. I agree with Scott completely. Getting past that test and pilot phase is very important, but also I agree with Aaron as far as the incentive piece. But he made an important comment there. There's a lot of incentives across a lot of different areas, but there's nobody that's consolidating all that together and saying, here's an easy place to go and pick up what incentives are available in your market. So for us as an OEM, we're having to go out and look for those opportunities and help our customers find them. As these, you know, states are very interested in doing this, they should maybe make this a little bit easier. And some of the smaller fleets who don't have the teams to do that work, right? So, and an OEM, I mean, that's, you know, shouldn't necessarily be our job to do that. But it is something I think if you're, as an organization, looking for something to do, that might be a way, consolidating some of these incentive paths and making it easier for people to get access to them.
Yeah, no, you know, we've heard similar comments in different markets as well, that, you know, sometimes it's really hard for a fleet even to know about all the incentives for vehicles, you know, not even talking about the incentives for infrastructure, right? Because, you know, it's not just one or the other. You need to have them combined at the same time. So it's really good to to get that integration and making the business case to fleets like a lot easier. And also, so Scott, you mentioned, you know, this issue of that, you know, the major fleets are interested in pilots and demonstrations, but not quite yet on full commercialization. And I'm wondering if, you know, what you think of the role of new finance like models, like all these options, you know, as ways to, you know, so to speak, de-risk the investment for major fleets. And, you know, also, so welcome the you know, the perspectives from Aaron and John, like on this as well. So is this a good route to explore, like, as well?
From a de-risk, there's so much risk. But yeah, I think we should look at lots of different things. It's not like we're just making an incremental change here. We're talking about a significant shift in the way the vehicles operate with their infrastructure. So, you know, there's a lot of risk in that. There's a lot of risk in putting in, as I said earlier, you know, maybe millions of dollars worth of infrastructure, wondering, you know, when are the vehicles going to show up? You know, lots of risk, and I think anything that can be done to take that away, at least as we get this ball rolling, you know, will build momentum as long as it's positive. You know, whether that's financing, creativity, whether that's incentives. I mean, I was asked one time, what's it going to take for UPS to do a large scale deployment? And obviously we're going to do that at some point, but, you know, make UPS or make me a deal as a fleet that I can't refuse, that, you know, just to get the ball rolling. And we have the fleet to show what good looks like, and then we can go from there. But at that point, you know, now then we at least have a basis to go off of, because we don't have that now. And I think we're going to do patchworks, you know, sort of pieces until we really dive in and say, listen, let's be serious about this. make it a big project, but don't put the burden on the, you know, the fleet that's got to try to operate their business in the midst of this, you know, financially, because, you know, we're already going to have some difficulties in terms of providing the service we need to, because there's going to be hiccups along the way.
Right.
Cristiano, can I step in just as a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Sita Holstach. I work for the Dutch government, and we had a similar webinar on Europe 2 days ago. And I'm very triggered, Scott, by what you're saying about the offer you can't refuse. So what would that offer look like? Except the costs, obviously, but who's on the table? Like, who's around the table making that offer?
I haven't got the offer. I haven't got the offer yet, but you know, it has to line up with, because if UPS takes incentives and government funding seriously, and I think that's why we're, you know, considered a good partner, whether it's with ARB or whether it's with, you know, South Coast or DOE, because, you know, we're going to sign up for projects and with partners that we know has a sustainable future. So we want to make sure that, you know, whoever's providing the trucks have the same sort of vision that we do as what they should be. And, you know, it's not just let's put, you know, random partners together here, but I think that the right partners, you know, with the right vision, it could be very powerful. But we haven't had the offer that I can't refuse quite yet.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if John and Aaron want to comment on that, but I also want to have a question more on the manufacturing piece. And so is Kenworth and BYD getting strong enough signals to invest like in this? It's like, do you feel that the demand is going to be like in place for you to invest like in technology and production?
Yeah, this is John. I'll respond first if you don't mind, Cristiano. Yes, obviously, 100%. We built the hybrid electric vehicles whiles ago. I mean, 20 years ago. So we're interested in the technology. As the technology progresses, we are investing. We've got trial trucks running all over the country right now. We're investing in either battery electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles. As Scott said, we're trying to figure out what's the right thing. How do we reduce that risk to the end customer? We need to make sure that technology is viable. It has to be 100% robust. It has to be better than a diesel as far as uptime. So that is our mission, and we are investing. We will have production available vehicles as well. So it is on our roadmap. We see the demand. We know our customers would like to do it, and like with UPS, we'll work with them as we can to meet their needs, but want to make sure that it meets their needs. It has to be 100% reliable. I think that's the key point, and that's where I think Scott was going. He can't put a large fleet of these vehicles out there that don't meet his uptime requirements. He still has to deliver packages. And I think that's the key point for us, is we want to make sure the vehicles are 100% reliable. And for the long term, the life of the vehicle as well. So that is a big challenge for us, and that's what we're focused on right now. But we are investing for certain.
Yeah, from BYD's perspective, obviously we're investing. We're only investing in EVs, so we've taken that gamble that it's going to happen. I think to build on John's point, the make it easier point in every way for all the government folks that are on. Whatever can be done creatively to do that is really important. A lot of truck fleets around the country do use leasing as a model. All of them have different financial situations. Some of them want the assets on their balance sheet, some don't. Some want to have depreciation. So, there's all kinds of situations, and you have a number of programs out there for incentives right now that frankly don't allow leasing, or they're trying to figure out how to allow leasing. The other point on that is like a lot of the programs like VW require scrappage. Well, there's there's a lot of fleets out there that are some of those first mover fleets that would want to take more of the risk, that would want to be the first to have, you know, a fleet in a region that's all electric or that kind of thing. But the reality is that same fleet, that mentality is probably the fleet that also turns over trucks very quickly, right? And buys new trucks, and they're always buying the latest technology. They're buying the latest diesel technology. So they don't have a, you know, 10-year-old truck to scrap in order to get an incentive. So there's a lot of these like inefficiencies that are built in that aren't getting to some of the people that can move the market. And that, you know, that was one of my main points there. And then, you know, kind of back to what John was saying, like as you're moving along here, you don't really hit an efficiency as a manufacturer until you're talking in the thousands, right? You've got to get in the thousands of trucks in a model in order to get a real manufacturing line to be able to produce at the kind of numbers that Scott and others want to see. And so, you know, we've got to do that sort of one way or another. And if the rules are tough to use incentives, or they're here and there, or they're not getting to the fleets that can actually, that would want to take more risk, that want to be a first mover, then that's going to slow things down. And so I think that's the real challenge here, is trying to figure out how to make all these things more efficient, whether it's financing, whether it's not requiring scrappage, or finding a way to do that creatively. I know San Joaquin Valley has come up with something to do that, where a fleet could trade a vehicle to another fleet that has an older vehicle, and that vehicle could be scrapped. You know, those are the kind of creative things that need to happen in order to kind of make this market proliferate faster.
Thank you. Thank you. I also wanted to like invite my colleagues Peter and Sita to see what kind of questions we have from the audience as well. And thank you for all of those who asked your questions. So what have you got for our panelists?
Thanks, Cristiano, and thanks to all the participants who have been posting some really great questions via the GoToWebinar system. I guess building up maybe first, building on the sort of discussion now, or most recently around sort of, you know, risk management approaches. You know, we've been hearing about different potential models. Somebody posed a question about a sort of fixed rate pay per mile sort of, you know, EVs as a service model, where you know, inclusive of the vehicle purchase, charger, energy supply, and maintenance. You know, whether a model like that would be sort of appealing to Scott, and on the manufacturer side, if that's something that, you know, you all have been in discussions about.
I mean, I think it would. I think the struggle is right now having a product that could meet our needs no matter what the mileage is. You know, if it's, I think we've got a better chance of catching that range that's needed in our last mile medium duty side. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter how much the cost per mile is if it only does 150 miles for us, because it's just too limited. You know, that's why, you know, natural gas vehicles have worked out really well for us, because we were able to just, you know, take that business case of the cost of natural gas to the cost of diesel. And because we were able to put the miles on, it drove the business case. And that's where it becomes a little more difficult with the electric, if you're going to use that same model for electric, because range isn't going to be able to do that quite yet.
I definitely agree with Scott. Back to the question on, could you have repeated mine? Do you mind repeating that question?
It was basically about sort of new approaches, you know, thinking of electric vehicles as a service that includes sort of a bundled pay per mile approach there.
Yeah. The one point I would make there, as far as if it's a pay per mile, someone's got to have that capital on their books, right? So somehow, as an OEM, we have to make a business case for it, as just like Scott would have to make a business case for having those capital assets on his books. So the incentives, one way or another, would have to support that. So it doesn't get past that incentive piece, at least with the cost of the vehicles as they are today, or as we see them in the short term. That's just, you know, that's my gut feel.
Yeah, I think I agree with John. You might have to remember that we're OEMs, and like you said earlier, it's already kind of a different thing for us to realize, well, we need to get heavily involved in working incentive programs and things like that to just help our customers. Or even, on the infrastructure side, we do that. We've got to partner with people on infrastructure or those that are willing to invest in infrastructure so we can help bring that to our customer. It's already adding quite a bit of complication to it. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting idea. I think there are maybe investors out there that would be willing to, purchase a fleet for use in that kind of business model. But those things, I mean, just to be, completely frank, they also add cost, right? If you're going to get an investor with equity capital that wants to invest in a new idea, and it's going to be, a fleet of vehicles that they can, lease by the mile or rent by the mile to UPS, they're going to expect a pretty solid return on that. So that's increasing the cost to UPS, and so it's just, how does it really drive down the cost is the question. I don't think it, as Scott pointed out, it's maybe not so much for him. He needs to see that economic TCO work out regardless. So it's not really necessarily the risk of ownership that's keeping him away from it.
One follow-up question on that from my side, if that's okay. So incentives are coming up a lot as part of the solution to kind of move this forward faster. As I know it, at least in Europe, the TCO is like 20 to 30% away from break even. So what level of incentives would be needed, do you think, to kind of make that threshold a bit lower to get the ball rolling faster towards kind of bigger productions? Or is that a very difficult question to answer? I can imagine.
From a fleet standpoint, it would depend. If it depends on the product being offered, and there's a difference. Not all electric vehicles are created equal, and not all of them may have the connectivity, the potential for automation, for ADAS. They could, but that's an important consideration. And, we haven't built that into our value proposition quite yet, but there's lots of things that electric vehicles have the potential to do. So incentives, again, I think an incentive for one may be great, but it may not be good for something else that's, doesn't look like what the future is. Because we really want this to build momentum because it's the right thing to do for the business as well as environment. Like it, I know that it's apples and oranges to compare the consumer market to trucks, but if you look at who's got the backlogs of electric vehicles that people are clamoring to try to get, and it's the Cybertruck, and it's the Mach Mustang, and those you could say, well, if there's a vehicle out there that has that, it'll definitely create more interest than maybe, I'm not going to use any other OEMs, but there's other less interesting versions of them that are electric as well.
Okay.
So
go ahead. I was going to add to the response there that it depends, I think, is really appropriate. That Scott mentioned, right? Model, work cycle, et cetera, really can vary across the board. And what I'd kind of recommend on that is, the state of California had an analogous program in solar as they were trying to deploy, distributed solar across the state a while back that had, for 5 years or so, it was a step down program. When it's really hard to determine where the market is, create a incentive program that starts high and steps down with volume, where you have more money available in larger pools. So, so many trucks at this incentive, then the next step is more trucks, but at a lower incentive, and more trucks at a lower incentive. And you can really drive the market, because then it makes the fleets also have to think, do I want it now? I might take some more risk, but I get a better incentive. Do I want to wait for the market to develop a little bit more, in which I'm going to maybe pay a little less, maybe I'll have a little more reliability, but it's a lower incentive. It starts to create kind of a market that determines how much incentives are a necessity. I know that's not a great answer for, you know, government folks that want to say, hey, X amount of dollars will do it, right? Let's put this in, it'll do it, and the market's there. But it's just such a complicated equation that I think that's the only way you can approach it, is with kind of this moving incentive program that steps down with the market.
I agree. I think that the Toyota Prius is probably a good example of how that, I think that might be what good looks like from a step down incentive program.
So those are really good perspectives here. Also want to be mindful of some of the remaining questions, and I found and I saw a few ones, you know, thinking about what local government can do, and you know, and this issue of last mile delivery, and some local governments, you know, because they have goals to improve air pollution, you know, they could also implement certain policies for you know, for access restrictions and giving benefits to zero emission technologies. And so I wonder, you know, what you all like think about those type of policies, like as well, in terms of local governments implementing local policies, you know, giving incentives and disincentives depending on the technology. So what's your take?
We've seen that, you know, Europe is more stick oriented and US is more carrot oriented.
Sita, they're looking at you now in the Netherlands.
So
yeah, we might be rulers to that.
Nobody likes to get hit with a stick, but John brought it up earlier that incentives sometimes, and whether they're incentives locally or policies locally, sometimes they don't get bundled up, because you've got utilities that come into play, you've got OEMs that come into play, state governments, federal governments, and wrapping up a package that says, hey, my city or my specific area can offer this as a group. It may not be what they're specifically offering as an individual standalone, but if you package that up and go, that may be a deal that I can't refuse because it's a utility benefit, all these pieces that could come into play. You know, we can't go everywhere first. We're going to go to the places that have the best incentives to go there first, or the worst penalties.
Mm-hmm. I think the challenge with the local government regulations, or this, as Scott calls the stick, is that it limits the fleets on what they can do, right? They're going to be restricted to what units they can put in those cities, and they can't move them somewhere else if that's the case. And you know, while it might be a positive, there's some negatives to that as well, right? It just limits what is available for the customers in those areas, and that would be a concern I would have. But there's some positives to it as well. It gives an opportunity or a location for somebody to trial this technology. So.
Yeah. No, thank you. And you know, I also want to be mindful of the time here, and then give a perspective on next steps. So first, you know, I wanted to you know, thank you all of the speakers for the great presentations and comments as well. So if we can go, yeah. So as I said, this is the second dialogue in a series of regional dialogues. So next week, we're going to have a dialogue with a focus in India. And then on September 22nd, we're going to merge all the conclusions from these 3 regional dialogues during an event at Climate Week, like in New York City, again, virtual. And this is on a way to engaging with countries towards their climate commitments towards COP26. That ideally, you know, we want as part of their emission reduction targets that they also include more tangible policies and targets to encourage zero emission freight vehicles in their own jurisdictions. So with that, I would like to thank you, all the panel and the organizers, and all of you for attending. And again, we're going to be following up. We have a copy of the slides, a recording of the presentation, and any other follow-up materials. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cristiano.
Thanks, everyone.